All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. Ecclesiastes 1. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. And my name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I'm your host. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this week. I hope you all enjoyed last week's episode, if you're returning listeners. And if you are a newcomer, welcome. Please feel free to go through the back catalog of the episodes. I hope you all enjoy it. Nothing major to report this week in terms of feedback or criticism or anything like that. So let's go ahead and dive into what might be our next to last episode this season. Certainly one of our last three or four at the most. Now, this week we will finish off talking about the humans of northern South America, and then we will be talking about the astounding Amazon River, its tributaries, and what we know about the peoples populating one of those many shores, or, I should say, the whatever shores they're occupying. We'll try to talk about as much of them as we can. Though, depending on how long this goes, I may only give a brief breakdown of the Amazon itself, and then we'll talk about the peoples next week. But we're going to go ahead and start with the Guayanas, or Las Guayanas, or Guyana. No, wait. Sorry, my Spanish is not very good. Las Guayanas is the region. And this region covers a small portion of modern-day Brazil, a few Venezuelan states, and the modern countries of Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana, which is technically a French dependency, but you get what I mean. And it is a little ironic that I'm covering this region this week. I will not be talking about Venezuela's claims on Guyanan territory. The basis for these claims and what is driving the latest push is not something that we will be getting into until much, much later. Instead, I'm just going to talk about, much older outcome, or I guess much older realities of the region. Now, the origin of the term Guyana is somewhat debated. It was loaned into Spanish and then got transmitted into Portuguese, French, English, and Dutch. The debate into which language the Spanish adopted it from is the primary, point of contention. Excuse me. There are two options. Either it is from an Arawak language or a Caravan language. Despite being from different language families, a number of groups from both language families have interacted with each other for so long that they have a fair amount of overlap in a number of features, including vocabulary. This means that, there is reasonable doubt as to which group coined the term first. And the term means land of many waters, and it is an accurate description, but there is much more to the region. In addition to being home to many waters, it is also home to a number of highlands and a kind of a weathered interior mountain range, or maybe mountain-esque might be a better term, but it is known as a craton, is the geologic term for that kind of mountain makeup. As a whole, this is known as the Guyana Shield, and one feature found in this region is called a tepui. These are very similar to North American mesas. Large, flat-topped mountains, usually isolated. The term came into Spanish from the Paymon people, and they speak a dialect of Caravan. It translates as House of the Gods. Now, these mountains and highlands are extremely difficult to cross, and with the surrounding rainforests form like the Darien Gap, they kind of form, again, a sieve on the region. Getting through and occupying this region was not easy. And try as I might, I could not find any articles on human sites earlier than 11,000 BC. Now, part of that is probably due to the climate. Finding anything older would probably require some luck. As far as I can tell, the region isn't quite as high on the archaeological priority list as some other parts of South America. And this is mainly due to how sparsely populated the region is. The three primary countries that make up the Guayanas, their modern population combined is around 1.7 million, give or take 10,000 or so. And even combining the parts of Venezuela and Brazil that are technically part of the region, you don't get more than 4.5 million. In fact, you get a little under 4.5 million. Now, at the time period of our episodes, we see most habitation in modern Suriname, near the Sipaliwini River, and this is probably an Arawak word that means river of stones. And around this river, not in it, but in these flat terrain around the river, they have found around 20 or so sites that were production areas for stone tools that can be dated to around 8,000 BC. And these sites show 4 different types of weapon points, 2 larger ones that were larger spear points, and 2 smaller points that were probably for arrows or, like throwing javelins. The larger points were probably used for hunting large animals, things like deer, or maybe even, like that theory suggested last week in Venezuela and Colombia, that there may have even been remaining megafauna in the region at this time. There have been some bones that have not been able to be identified, and they could be from larger animals. And of course, the smaller heads are for smaller animals. They are also home to, hammering tools, scrapers, kind of knives, etc. And of course, you find your waste stones and failed attempt stones, just for tools that did not end up coming out the way they wanted to. Excuse me. Now, it should be noted that these sites were found away from where the humans making them were living day to day. These locations tended to be kind of up in the highlands and hills, and kind of in rock shelters. Not caves, but rock shelters. And in these rock shelters, they've actually found petroglyph carvings in these dwelling sites. But these cannot be reliably dated to the same humans that were making these stone tools, because pottery shards have been found in these caves, and pottery didn't appear in this region, of course, until much later. So that shows that the mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyle remains active in this region, even after you see groups adopt semi-sedentary agriculture, full-scale, like permanent agriculture, adopt a more aquatic lifestyle as well, fishing, that kind of thing. And they're continuing a tradition, the hunter-gatherers. So that is one of the hallmarks of this region. You have all these different groups living these different types of lifestyles, all interacting with each other. Never in huge numbers, but in terms of variety of life, it's pretty high up there. Now, another group that exists during this season is known as the Alaka. Now, they're located further west in modern Guyana. However, they are just beginning to establish themselves as a distinct kind of tool culture, and their earliest artifacts are dated right at 6000 BC, right as our season's ending. So we probably won't go into them too much here. But that being said, I will go ahead and say that they're adapting more Neolithic tool sets, the smaller bladelets, the micro bladelets, and they are much more active fishing in terms of fishing and also eating shellfish than the groups that exist in Suriname. There's no evidence of them being fishers or making nearly as many microbladelets. This is something that the groups in Guyana may have to undertake, but the groups, at least we're referring to in Sipaliwini, they're a little bit behind in terms of having to create the microblade Neolithic tool set. And that makes sense. Remember, it's kind of spreading out from the Andes in this region as the environment changes. And, of course, the Alaka exists 2,000 years after the Sipaliwini begin. So it would make sense that they're 2,000 years is plenty of time to adopt to this new kind of toolkit. Now the Alaka will exist into next season, and I think the Sipaliwini, they end around 7,000, so not a huge time period, but we know that their residences, I guess, for lack of a better term, are still in use. It's just they're replaced in terms of, at least in tool culture, fairly quickly. Now, aside from a few more kind of scattered singular sites, there is no other evidence of long-term Homo sapiens habitation of this region. Those two groups are pretty much it, at least in terms of long-term, residents. I'm sure that there were probably isolated groups that would occasionally enter into the region at earlier time periods, but they probably would leave, sooner after, or at least maybe groups following them in were in such greater numbers that they just got completely assimilated or eliminated, depending on what the case may be. Now, as for who these people are, they're probably all descendants of people who had crossed the Andes via, the numerous mountain valleys and rivers, and then spread into the interior of the continent, and then followed other rivers north past the Guiana Shield. Of course, finding remains in DNA to identify the exact relationship between these various groups and the order at which people entered the region at which time has been extremely difficult because, again, they can't find any DNA dating back to that time because of the environment that we're dealing with. So, a lot of assumptions have been made about all this, and I am doing it myself. I doubt they're having much interaction with groups coming down from Central America and the kind of the Atlantic migration route that we know was opening up. And this is probably happening in the Colombia and Venezuelan region at this point in time. In fact, due to the terrain, agriculture, and more migration into the region won't happen at a large scale until much later than in other parts of South America. But eventually it does come to the region. I imagine that the time it took for the kind of Central American migrants to get a foothold, either through trade or intermarriage or war or whatever, from the groups in the Colombia, Venezuela regions, probably took a little bit of time. Hence why they wouldn't have attempted to move through that rocky hilllands into the Guyanas. But again, part of that's an assumption on my part. Now, excuse me, we can go ahead and move and start talking about the Amazon River and the Amazon River Basin. We'll start with the Amazon's name. You are probably familiar with the origin of the term Amazon, or at least where it's most popularly known from. Of course, Greek myth talks about the female warrior society, the Amazons. And that was not the initial name for the river. Initially, the Spanish referred to the river as the Marañón River. And this is actually kind of the headwaters of the Amazon. And this begins in Peru. It's one of the many rivers that kind of flow through the Andes and meet up to form the Amazon. And as for what it means, this is pretty highly debated, but some people believe that it is also possibly an old Tupian word, which meant something like running sea. Though again, that is debated. We're really not sure. Now, I think they've since discovered that the Marañón is not the technical source of the Amazon. There are two other rivers that I guess have basically been the furthest away sources that feed into the river, but those have only been kind of confirmed in like the late 2010s, I believe. That was always kind of debated. I think they actually did like a full scientific study and measured everything out. So technically, the Marañón is not the headwater of the Amazon, but it is. I think it is still like the strongest of those early rivers that enters into it. It gives more water, even if it doesn't run the farthest to meet it. But that is at least the current scientific consensus. Now, to move on, let me look at my notes here. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I forgot to go into the detail of how the Amazon River was called the Amazon. As I said, initially it was called the Marañón. However, one of the early explorers along the river, it's Francisco, I believe it's Francisco de Orellana. I didn't write his name down in my notes because I'm an idiot. But he allegedly encountered a band of warriors who attacked his expedition, and these warriors were led by a woman. So he, of course, being a product of the Renaissance that was going on, during that time period, or at least had affected that time period, if depending on if you consider it ended at that point or not. But he, being familiar with Greek mythology, thought warrior women, this very much is, in line with the Amazon, so he called it the Amazon River. And that name, of course, because it's dramatic and romantic and popular, I guess, for lack of a better term, exciting. It made a lot of sense to refer to it that way, and it was very popular and caught on. Sorry, I just had a flicker of my apartment's power here. I'm surprised that this is still recording, so apologies for that. Now, in terms of population, there were probably quite a number of groups spread all along the Amazon and all of its constituent rivers. I'm not going to quite go into the detail of these as I did with the Mississippi. This is something you'll probably, just quite frankly, there are too many to cover unless I wanted to devote an entire episode. And I may still do that. However, it probably won't happen until later when we have, again, a lot more groups to go over and go into detail on. Now, in terms of groups that, or at least regions of the river that we have the most information about, we have a few along the Amazon and its, as I said, its constituent rivers. And probably among the most interesting of these is the Llanos de Mojas or Llanos de Moxos, depending on, I guess, the paper you're reading, because both are used kind of interchangeably. These people were located in what is now modern day Bolivia. They are kind of at the some rivers that are kind of running north down the mountains and kind of meet in the Amazon Basin there. You'll sometimes see this place referred to as the Casarabe culture. And this group will kind of be one of the earlier adopters of agriculture in this region. Now, there's kind of like a really big kind of shift in archaeological understanding of the Amazons, or the Amazon River and the Amazon rainforest going on right now. There's some very, very big, I guess, kind of shifts in, archaeological discoveries in the area and how people kind of understand them. For the longest time, it was thought that the Amazon interior and the rainforest was not very highly populated because the soil there is such bad quality that it makes large-scale agriculture impossible. Recently, though, that has kind of come around and been very much challenged and kind of overturned, at least among experts in the field. Excuse me. You can read a book by Eduardo Neves. It is called, forgive me, I don't have the title in front of me. I got to go back through my notes here. Well, I say you can read it. If you can read Portuguese, yes, you can read it. But he kind of summarizes a lot of different groups or scientists that have kind of been examining the area. In fact, you probably saw some news articles that are like breaking news headlines. If you kind of browse anywhere online, you've probably seen that they've discovered with LiDAR these huge cities and they're monumental like stuff, and that that this completely overwrites history, and it does. There's no denying that, because again, it's completely turned our understanding of the region on its head. But yeah, in some cases it's a little bit overstated, because obviously that there are those that we talked about how there are certain like ancient high technology people and ancient aliens, they kind of spread agriculture, and there's this lost civilization. And again, I'm a firm belief that there absolutely are lost civilizations. I just don't think that they got their technology from, space aliens or, like psychic humans, that kind of thing. But, yeah, no, there has absolutely been lost civilizations. And this is probably, or at least this region is probably home to a couple. But we'll talk about that. Oh, and the title of Eduardo Neves's book is it's Under the Times of the Equinox, 8,000 Years of History in Central Amazon. It is not translated into English just yet, although I do believe it is being worked on, at least according to the articles I read. The Portuguese title is Sob os Tempos de Equinocia, 8,000 años de historia na Amazônia Central. And I do apologize for any of my Portuguese-speaking listeners. I know that there are at least a couple who at least understand a little bit of Portuguese. Yes, so that is the title of the book. And it kind of summarizes, again, some of the bigger discoveries that have happened in the last 20 years or so, talking about groups in the Amazon. But as you can probably guess from the title, that these kind of centralized or at least more sedentary groups don't start showing up until the very end of our season. But what they are starting to do, they are actually, through their efforts, because the soil is so difficult to raise crops in, they do, it required a lot of work, essentially, to be able to make sure that everything is growing there. And this is a process that they've probably started to learn probably at least 500 years before the end of this season. We can see that there's they're probably helping to expand a lot of the nut and fruit trees in the region, along with the introduction to agriculture. Maize coming down from the south. Cassava is another crop that would be grown by these groups. So yeah, there are a number of groups that will become agriculturalists, and they will, of course, be interacting with the more traditional hunter-gatherer groups that are still kind of hanging around in the Amazon basin. Of course, it should come as no surprise that fishing and harvesting of other aquatic life is also a very important part of the diets of not just hunter-gatherers, but also, again, these early agricultural adopters as well. So this region is undergoing, fairly big changes. A little bit after the changes happening in the Andes proper. Excuse me. And again, this shouldn't be too much of a surprise. I think the more interesting questions for a lot of this is going to be, and some of this stuff I'm sure we'll get answers on. As I've said, that this is kind of like a recently kind of taken off in a big way in terms of how, we're studying and learning about the region. There's a lot of work, of course, that still needs to be done, but it is something that is going to be happening more and more. I think I've saw like 3 or 4 different groups of professors and researchers are all getting ready to kind of dive in to the various parts of the Amazons. I think there is an American team that's going to do like the Xingu River. Neves is he's been working at a site in Brazil for a number of years, and he's going to continue to work there. And then I think he said he wanted to go to some of these other more interior places too. Of course, the Amazon being the Amazon, it's not something that's easy just to dive into. So there does have to be a lot of precautions done. So this is something that's going to take decades to really even get more information on. Because again, we found a lot of this evidence for this kind of stuff through LiDAR. So planes flying over the region, taking those infrared pictures and seeing what you can find that way. And that's, they've flown over a fair portion of the region to get those pictures. But this is not something that we're going to be able to get a lot of information from for some time, unfortunately. That said, because we know that, or we're beginning to understand that agriculture entered into this region, we know how it entered into the region. We know it's coming from kind of the western Amazon part of the Amazon Basin, the western parts. We know it's coming from places like Ecuador and Peru. So we know that they would have had to been using some of the rivers in that region for transport. Because once you get through those cliffs, you have to basically get to a part where you can get on the river and then go down the river. Because going through those rocky areas is just impossible. So we know some of the rivers that would have been important, and we can also tell because, again, we have the flights over. We know where some of these locations are and what rivers they're closest to. Some of the more important ones are the Napo River, the Putumayo, the Marañón. Again, we've already talked about that. Huallaga, Ucayali, the Urua and Puros, as well as one known as the Madre de Dios. There are a number of sites positioned where trade between the Andean cultures or proto-cultures are, where they're situated in perfect position to be kind of these the first point of contact from these groups in the Andes, and then being kind of the intermediaries between groups further inland. Now, are these groups further inland related to the these early sedentary societies in the Amazons, or are they rivals? Are they completely unrelated and just very beneficial trade partners? Unfortunately, we cannot say. Because again, we just don't have the hard evidence or any DNA evidence to really kind of dive into this. We have some linguistic stuff, but linguistics, again, can be kind of hit or miss. And the way the linguistic maps are kind of spread for South America kind of makes it a little hard. And, of course, there are dead languages that we know have died out that, are somewhat attested, so we're not sure where those dead languages would fit into I guess the larger language families. Some sites, I guess, further kind of the middle section of the Amazon. We have the Abrigo do Sol, which is in Mato Grosso. It is dated to around 8,700 BC, and it will continue to be in use to about 4,500 BC. And this is a completely aceramic culture. They don't have any kind of pottery, which other places, at least towards the later bit of that range, do adopt pottery. So it appears, for whatever reason, pottery was not being traded this far inland, which, again, for this season, pottery is probably very rare in the Americas. I think maybe only 1 or 2 places are using it at our time period, and even then that evidence is kind of spotty. But it does show that there are certain products and things that are not being traded, as opposed to crops and foodstuffs, and I'm sure precious stones and that kind of thing are being traded. Another site in this region is Gruta de Gavial, and that is dated to about 7,100 is when it starts, and this site will be occupied for quite a while. It's well past 1,000 BC before it is abandoned. So we see a lot of sites that have long-term use. Now, not all of them are agricultural sites. In fact, many of these, at least in the middle Amazon area, are more hunter-gatherer based. But that's not to say that, again, they didn't have contact with agricultural groups, or that they were themselves not practicing at least small-scale agriculture, or maybe even horticulture, that kind of level of stuff. But it does show that that there is some kind of disconnect between these groups, that they're not all adopting everything piecemeal, or spreading everything piecemeal. There's one other site in the middle Amazon. It's on the Jamari River, and that is dated to between, I believe, 7,500 and 5,700 BC. And in fact, there are actually a couple of sites along that river that can be dated to that period. I think 4. And there is evidence of ceramics at the later phase, which is again is next season when that would show up. So there's trade, there's interactions, but there is an unevenness between this trade. What that can mean, what the cause between the uneven trade is almost impossible to say, just based on what we know right now. But yeah, so I know that I'm not able to give too much information on those sites other than their dates. Again, that's partly because the information I was able to get is from a very long document. It's over 300 pages. There's a great PDF. It's from Lund University. It's Nature and Culture in Prehistoric Amazonia, using GIS to reconstruct ancient ethnogenetic processes from archaeology, linguistics, geography, and ethnohistory. And I will continue to use this because, again, it's great. I think the author is Love Erickson, is the name of the primary author. And it was published in, I believe, 2011. So this is just the early LiDAR stuff. And I think most of the dates are given are just from kind of like exploratory stuff. So I'm sure that there are revisions to this that I just cannot access yet because I just haven't been able to find them. I also had an article from Manga Bay, which is where I was able to get the Eduardo Neves information and title of his book, and he had some really good quotes and stuff. And that was done in May 3rd of this year. So I do recommend, if you are interested in getting all the nitty-gritty details, to use those sources. Now, we will talk about some of the southern Amazonian, sites. And hopefully I can try to find some more information on what is found at these sites. Again, They didn't go into too much detail, but I think that's because they haven't been able to really dig into these sites as much as they would want to, and as much as I would have liked them to so I could convey that information to you. But I think it's important to remember these points in the Amazon, and this is something that we're going to come back to, obviously, in the future. Very long-lasting sites for the most part. Constant levels of contact with your neighbors, but it's an unequal level of contact from their neighbors, at least in terms of what artifacts are in demand or are actually being traded. Also, there is a surprisingly high level of human impact on the environment, and that's only going to pick up, and not in the way I think most of us would expect. Generally, when we think of sedentary agricultural societies, we think they tend to be a little bit more wasteful, or at least a little bit more destructive than they are constructive, at least when it comes in terms of nature. But that's something to think about for next time. So next week we will be diving into, again, some of the southern Amazonian stuff, and then we will also be going into what is now Patagonia, southern Argentina, and Chile, and that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, I hope you'll be back for that. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out to me at war@revpod@gmail.com, or you can also comment on any of my YouTube videos. I will get it, though it may take a day or two for me to be able to actually read them. And you can also direct message me on Twitter. So, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope I haven't confused you too much with this just random dates and stuff. Again, I would have loved to have been able to get, more solid information. Unfortunately, it just doesn't exist, at least in English. It's possible it could exist in Portuguese. I don't know. But I do hope that Eduardo Neves' book is translated sooner rather than later into English, so I can listen to it. Because, again, it is a 6,000-year history. An 8,000-year history. So that's right at the end of this season, and it goes forward, of course, into the modern times. So I look forward to talking about, or at least being able to mention, some other sites. And then in the future, when we get back to it, when we get into time frames, we know a little bit more about them. I'll go into more detail on where these sites are located where these sites are located in relation to each other, and where it might be easier for us to understand where they are. Because me pulling up Google Maps, it was a little bit of a tricky situation to find a couple of those places I mentioned. But when I say Western, it's like right on the border between Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru. When I say Central, that can go from, of course, the middle of Brazil, but it can also go all the way south again to, or all the way north again to Colombia, Venezuela, the Guayanas, or as far south as I believe the Paraguay Brazilian border, Uruguay Brazilian border, that kind of stuff. And when I talk about south, it's going to be more towards the coast and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I hope everyone has enjoyed. I hope I wasn't too confusing. If I am, please let me know, and I'll try to explain things a little bit better. Very busy week behind me, very busy week ahead. Holiday season, all that kind of stuff is very busy. So thank you all for joining me, and I will see you all next time. Thank you. I hope you have a good rest of your day, a good rest of your week. Thank you. Goodbye.